This week's episode is brought to you by Parrot Dog, limited release 27. This scrumptious coconut stout is brewed with coconut and cacao nibs. Think a liquid bounty bar, packed full of coconut and chocolate with just the right amount of sweetness. Nice. Welcome back to the Design Principles podcast. Ben and Gerard are on a break this week. Instead, I am joined by award-winning architect Rafe Maclean of Rafe Maclean Architects, Joe Lyth, founder of Well Architecture and chairman of the Passive House Institute of New Zealand, and Josh Atkins, director of Compound Builders and owner of Green Home of the Year 2025. These esteemed guests provide some serious insight into the realm of performance and aesthetics. Let's dive in. Thank you very much for deciding to kind of come onto the pod, Joe, Josh and Rafe. It's awesome to have you guys here to chat. Actually stems from, Joe, your message to me saying we should have a chat about performance versus aesthetics or performance versus design and how they try and debunk maybe a few common misconceptions or frustrations that we have as designers, and Josh yourself as a homeowner and builder who operate and will try and operate in that more high performance realm. So welcome all. Lovely to have you here. If you guys wouldn't mind, Rafe, I'll just take a sip of wine. I might start with you. Quick intro for those who may not know you, although you're pretty well known, would be great. And then we'll just go Rafe, Joe, and then Josh, and then we can crack into it.
Sure. Yeah. I'm Rafe Maclean. I'm an architect based in Wanaka. Been in my own practice for about 20 years now. And yeah, really into really good architecture that looks really good and feels good. Came across Passive House around 12 years ago now, I think, and upskilled myself and slowly merged that into my work. And now we're doing quite a few certified passive houses, and we do thermal modelling for all our projects now. So yeah, it's a really good topic that we're talking about today.
I'm Joe Lyth. I wear a few different hats. So I'm a director of Well Architecture, which is my new firm. I set up last year. We do what I think is beautiful architecture that balances budget with buildability and also performance as well. I'm also the chair of the Passive House Institute in New Zealand. So try my hand at governance, which is entertaining. And then I also I teach the Homestar, or I'm one of the teachers on the Homestar designer course for New Zealand Green Building Council. I'm also a dad to 3 crazy Kiwis and a husband to Sarah, and a Yorkshireman through and through, despite moving away from Yorkshire, 15 years ago or something. We got to New Zealand in 2016 to travel for a few months, and then got sucked into this beautiful country. Then had some kids who got sick because of the houses they were living in. So then we kind of deep dived into building performance. What is a healthy building? How do we get to it? And yeah, suddenly I'm here, which is a bit of a crazy journey.
I'm Josh, director at Compound Builders down in Queenstown. Been down here for 11 years of my building career, and started Compound after, not sure exactly, but dove into the world of high performance, energy efficient buildings and passive house. And that's essentially what we do. We've got myself and 2 others in the team now, certified passive house builders. I built Homestar with you, Sam, and I'm just really into high performance, energy efficiency, and how that is brought to the built environment, and managing that with budget and obviously design of the architects.
Nice. And also homeowner and builder of Green Home of the Year, right?
Oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, homeowner with my brothers. We own a house that I'm sitting in that we built, and with Team Green Architects, and that was modelled and would be about low energy passive house, but I wasn't certified. And about 2.5 years, we've got 5 kilowatt solar system, and we are net positive in terms of our consumption and exporting back to the grid. Still winning financially in terms of power, but I think the power companies are starting to bump those rates up. So I guess our return on investment is just getting better and better.
Joe, you touched on how your kids got sick, and so you wanted them to live in a healthier home, and it sort of led you down that path. And Josh, you sort of touched on as well, wanting to live somewhere warm and dry, and that energy saving aspect of it. Be interesting, just kind of from your guys' perspectives, like what was it that drew you into this realm? It in New Zealand kind of seems, well, is still relatively niche, I'd say, but internationally is far more recognised. But what do you think it was that like drew you into it, and why? Like, what was the big driver?
Yeah.
I don't know. As I've gotten older and more into my building career, or just life, I think quite deeply about things. I grew up in Christchurch in just this classic villa, so kind of experienced what it's like to be pretty bloody cold, but never really thought much of it growing up. We were building some really nice houses in Queenstown, and then you start living in one as well. And just like noticing power consumption of houses, or going into bathrooms that are freezing in brand new houses, and my mind just started thinking about like efficiency and energy efficiency and something's impact environmentally as it's built and for the rest of its life. Like plastic doesn't break down, or I guess everything kind of, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. I always think about, so as a building, what more does it take just to make that building really not impact environmentally, but also on our resources for the rest of its life? I think about it, most decisions I make, like buying a vehicle, we buy Toyotas because they're just so damn reliable and cheap to run. But then with housing is just building efficiently so that your home can maintain an even temperature and be healthy, but also just not require more and more input. And then that's more time for yourself, more time to put your effort into other areas. I'm not like chopping firewood at night, having a soda fire in the evening, and then it's too hot, so then I'm opening the door, or like moving around, just like small things like that. Once I start thinking about it. So I got infatuated with Passive House and just the data around it, and you could design and get spreadsheets, and then with designers, and then the numbers you can move around based on window openings and heating systems. And then as I've kind of progressed, is now understanding that and the costs involved. I just don't like the idea of having to do something twice. Like, why heat a home more than once, or then over and over and over again, and then why have to renovate a house again? Why have to upgrade it? Why not just do it right once? So that's just kind of how I got into it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of have a similar sort of story, Josh. I mean, I grew up in the Yorkshire Dales in a sandstone farmhouse with an open Victorian range in the kitchen, and a fire in the living room sort of thing. And we'd have the fire at night, and you'd be falling asleep and have to open the door to let the heat out, and then sprint up to your bed where there's ice still on the inside of the window in winter, sort of thing. So I definitely didn't start from a performance perspective at all. And then moved to London, worked with several architects down there, and then started studying after working for a few years. And like the uni I went to was a great balance of design and technical aspects. So I did 2 years of classicism, so studied the orders and Palladio and all sorts of bits and pieces. But then we also had to do building performance, and we had to understand thermal bridging, and we had to do professional practice and techniques, and all of these within the same design pathway. So it was all part of the same holistic view of the building project. And then, we came to New Zealand just to travel for a bit, and then enjoyed it. I mean, the first house we stayed in was a really nice old villa overlooking Western Springs Park. And it had one of those little grills in the bedroom ceiling, and in winter it got so cold and wet you could see glowworms in the roof space above you, which was quite an experience. And it's interesting, being an outsider. I'm, not originally a Kiwi, I'm from the UK. It's kind of like a when in Rome because we learnt about vapor control and thermal bridging in uni, and I did it for years before coming here. And then you get here, and the first project I worked on was a 2-story classroom block that had 0.5 meter square concrete columns in the corners. And I was like, is this a skyscraper? So we didn't have, earthquakes or anything like that in the UK to consider. But there was just no insulation anywhere. There was just slab edges exposed and big lumps of concrete and steel sailing through everything. And I was just told, oh, that's what we do. This is the way we do it. And you kind of go, oh, well, I'm new here. I'll do what I need, I'm told to do, sort of thing. But it begins to grate after a while. Then we just got married before we came here, so started a young family. Moved to a little granny flat in Murray's Bay, 5 minutes from the beach, which is just, best location ever. But it was, it was kind of a mid-90s granny flat, so it was still single glazed and pretty poorly insulated, and it was just awful. And we had our first child and had the baby's room, and we had a little ceramic panel heater on the wall, and it would literally be, on full pelt, and then you'd take two steps to the right, and it would be 10 degrees. Because all the heat was just sailing straight out of the walls, and it was, dripping windows. And so it got to like 10 degrees in winter with heating on. And then in summer, we were in a back garden, basically, surrounded by trees and houses. So even if you opened the windows, there was no airflow, and the exterior air was, 20, 30 degrees. So we were sweltering. We recorded 36 degrees in the house once.
You got the full Kiwi experience.
Oh, man, baptism of fire, absolutely. And yeah, we just... And she was getting really sick. And so she ended up on an inhaler, and then we had a second child, and the same thing was happening. And we just couldn't do it anymore. Lying there at night, listening to these hacking coughs that have been going on for a month because it's so cold, they just can't shake it. And so I was like, I can't do this anymore. And so kind of harked back to all the stuff I'd learned at uni, and then decided to do my passive house designer certification, go through that process. And it's just a rabbit hole. Once you're down there, you can't get back out again at all, because you just recognize, of course this makes sense. Like, why do we not all do this sort of thing? So I think, I think a lot of people think you're indoctrinated into passive house, but once you learn it, you can't unlearn that kind of side of things. So my entire drive for this is health, basically. And yes, absolutely, energy efficiency and reducing energy demand, and kind of the planet, better materials, lower embodied operational carbon. But it's health, it's people, it's the outcome, it's
the
making
health
sure
side
people.
of things interesting, Joe, because I feel like that's something that's probably not talked about or touched on enough. The focus is always on performance, of the building. It's not often talked about the condition of the inhabitants,
Mm-hmm.
And
it's a very hard metric to calculate health.
It is.
Yes, I think you can't measure it. You can't. What's the temperature of your health?
Yeah, there is a statistic though that and it's a bit of a dark one, but houses kill more people in warm countries than do in cold countries. Because in a cold country, you're cold, so the houses are designed to keep you warm. In a warm country, you're like, I'm a bit chilly. And so it just kills you, but over a longer period of time, because we just don't feel like we need to consider that side of things.
Interesting.
Really. It's sorry about that. Start on a light note.
Yeah, I consider New Zealand being kind of warm, I guess, compared to cold, harsh winters of like North American.
It's temperate here. It's very temperate.
It's warm temperate, but even in Northland, according to all the NIWA data, we are still in a heating climate, which means that there are more days under 20 degrees than over 20 degrees. So even in our warmest place, we are still technically a heating climate based on the data.
Rafe, what brought you into the fold? What indoctrinated you?
Yeah, I think I was about 10 years into my own practice, and we're doing lots of reasonably good work, and I guess, it was getting published and so forth. And I had feedback from one client, and I've talked about this before, but the feedback was that I thought this was going to be more efficient than it is, because it's using a lot of power to be comfortable. And I took that really quite personally, because it was a friend's family, their family house. And the engineer on that particular project was Paula Huggins, who is an structural engineer in Queenstown, and she was one of the first passive house designers in New Zealand, certified passive house designers. And she kept throwing little hints at me about detailing and stuff. And this is what you do in a passive house. And I was like, I don't know what a passive house is. Don't bother me about it. But I think some of those words sort of stuck in my mind. And after that feedback, I thought to myself, okay, I can do better than this. And there was just a slow realization that the New Zealand Building Code is not doing what it should be doing. It's just not. I thought it was, but it just wasn't. So researched all the different ways of improving my knowledge, and Passive House sort of stood out for its, I guess, its rigor. It's just so scientific. It's all numbers. There's no waffly sort of tick boxes or anything. It's just, I really like maths. So that sort of was a sweet spot for me. So I went off and did the course for a couple of weeks in Auckland, and then slowly introduced it into projects like air tightness and mechanical ventilation.
Was there like a reluctance from clients to kind of pick that up initially, or could you sell it pretty easily?
Yeah, definitely a reluctance. I mean, firstly, no builders knew how to do anything at that stage. Proclaimer was just coming into the scene in New Zealand. So their products were quite sort of new and sort of a bit fancy. And then there was I got this particular project. I was asked to do a talk at the Architecture Designers Conference in Dunedin, and gave a talk about my thoughts and my education and the passive house thinking and stuff, and showed them some details. And one of the people on the stand, they were selling stuff in the aisle on the side, their products and stuff. He saw my talk and he approached me afterwards and said, "Oh, I've got this section in Wanaka. I really like what you talked about. Let's talk more." And that was a bit of a breakthrough, and that ended up being the first certified passive house in the South Island.
Which house was that, right?
George House.
Cool.
Yeah, so we've done 2 houses for them now, both certified. The feedback from clients just on how badly their building was performing, that sort of triggered me. And then just some lucky breaks got me into sort of actually implementing those thoughts. And then later we moved to Dunedin for our children's education, and we were renting houses, and 2 of my family members were asthmatics, and we're trying to find these rental houses, and we'd send them in first, and if they came back within a minute wheezing, it was
it was a no-go.
And there was just so many cases like that. So that triggered us to build our own house down there, and that was a passive house. So, and the asthma just disappeared. So it's great. I think it's just building science. Right?
Yeah, it is. But it's so funny hearing you 3 talk, and the path that brought me into it was slightly different. I think I went traveling for a year and spent a lot of time in South America, Europe, and went to Antarctica as well. And in that time saw just a huge amount of receding glaciers and a lot of environmental impact. And you hear about the building industry being a 40% contributor to global warming, and a lot of that is in operational carbon. And so that kind of started to lead me down that path of why and what can we do better. So that's how I got to it. But it's kind of interesting hearing you all talk and about how as soon as you've realized how beneficial it can be, there's no turning back, basically. And whether it be health, whether it be financial, whether it be environmental, it's a lot of reasons to kind of head down this path. What do you think has been, and this is what I'm trying to lead to here, is I'm trying to segue this into how we can tie this back to the aesthetic thing, because what do you think has been the reluctance to picking this up more wholesale across the board, particularly in housing?
I think probably for us it's cost.
Yep.
It's definitely a premium to do the best building, and that's what we say to all our clients, is that we can do the best building you can imagine. It'll be the most comfortable, healthy building you can have. But then there's budgets, right?
Yep.
So, and we're not. It's really feels awkward saying that, but we're not a rich country, and building's really expensive. So we're always trying to find shortcuts to getting people on the property ladder, or getting people into the first home or retirement place. And if they can't afford it, you kind of have to sort of turn down the dial a bit sometimes and just do the best you can.
But it's that difficulty of the priorities and what gives, I always find. Like when we were building our house, I designed it so, I mean, it's a SIPS house, so it's got a warm roof, and we've got this big roof void up here we can use, but we had a tiny, tiny budget for what we wanted to do. So I designed it so it was going to be single story, and we, as a piece of floor we could take out to put a staircase in later, so we could add extra bedrooms up here and stuff like that. But the bank required a valuation because we had such a low deposit, and they said, "Oh, sorry, it's not going to be worth what you're going to pay to build it. You have to give it more bedrooms, make it look bigger, give it more bathrooms." And there's all these kind of like, that has zero impact on the performance of the building. And I've had clients who've come to me and said, "We want to do a passive house, but the valuation report says we have to have a fully tiled bathroom and we have to have an attached 2-car garage. And the subdivision consent conditions say we have to build something at least 150 square meters, and it has to have at least 2 different types of cladding." So there's all these impacts on the priorities that people have to give to make projects achievable. But also property is profit, and property is a vehicle for wealth in New Zealand because our economy is basically, built on houses. There's not much else going on a lot of the time. So they need to be worth a lot. And when you see valuations, it is the size. We built the 3rd biggest houses in the world behind Australia and America. If we built them ever so slightly smaller, what if that 4th bedroom was a 3rd bedroom with a desk in it and a sofa bed or something like that for the in-laws? Suddenly that 10 square meters is better windows and a ventilation system easily. So it's kind of simple forms. A corner is $2,500 per corner when you're talking to builders. So rather than popping out wardrobes and all sorts of things and really complex roofs with gables and gutters and eaves all over the place, just think simply, and if you can't make that beautiful and simple, then we're designers. That's our job.
But in saying that as well, Joe and Rafe, I'd say that you've been a great proponent of that. Like, you've made not even necessarily simple architecture, but just architecture in general. Like, I'd say some of the forms that you've developed in your projects aren't particularly simple, but they're still achieving this high performance thing. What do you think has been your success there, or how have you struck that balance?
Well, I mean, most of our projects are really simple, but they're just embellished with something.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And you only have to do thermal modeling to sort of work that out pretty quickly. Keeping things really simple has been a motto, and sort of the budget does go further. But sometimes, the sites are quite complex, right? So, and now I can get into talk about district plans and recession plans and stuff that sort of...
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it's a bit of a rabbit warren.
But it's interesting that the simplicity thing, I think for me, what I've experienced is the focus on simplicity to achieve performance often I've found is a deterrent to potential clients, because they go, we're going to do a high performance build, or we're going to do a passive house. It has to be a square with no windows, and we can't open the doors, and all this, all this sort of stuff. Whereas I guess what I'm leading to is like, Rafe, you've countered that completely. And Josh, I'd say with your place as well, like it's a great proponent of the fact that your house is essentially a 2-story cube. And it has, like you said, Rafe, it's got this a little bit of embellishment, but it's functional embellishment, Josh, in particular with your house, with the shading elements. But that really makes it a great piece of architecture. And I think what potential clients or what the lay people don't understand is that simple doesn't mean simple necessarily.
Yeah, I think early on, and I mean, when I say early on, like 5 years ago, if you looked at passive house on the internet, there aren't great examples of passive house. Very well engineered, but architecturally and sort of in terms of aesthetics, it's pretty brutal, some of the examples that you see. I think that's one thing that I'd really like to have more architects involved with passive house, because if you bring that into your toolbox and use it as a parameter in your designs, your designs are so enriched with this technical background, you can get architecture that actually works really well. So I think that's really important. That's why I personally got really into it, because I thought, well, there's a challenge there, because I see all these German, European examples of passive house, and like I said before, brutal. And here's us over here doing quite elegant little thin roof things that are applauded by the industry or the magazines and so forth. Can we find a middle ground? Something that accomplishes the engineering, but holds architecture stuff together. The sweet spot there that we've been targeting. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think like from a design point of view, and Josh, I imagine for you as well, from like a builder's perspective, it's quite easy. I mean, you can design something really incredibly beautiful, but it's basic in its kind of overall function or its detailing or something like along those lines. Or you can design something that's like all and considered and a beautiful piece of architecture, but it's really highly detailed, really highly considered. It's got all of these passive house it's not necessarily achieving passive house, but like maybe you're using those detail methods or something, you're just understanding how to do something a little bit better, and you're sort of more intrinsically involved in the design or in the build process. And ultimately, I think that has a flow-on effect to your general architecture and your general building as well.
Yeah, I think when you're, like Rafe was touching on, in terms of keeping it simple, but obviously still having architectural flair and design and using those methods, I think everyone here has done a house with good old-fashioned colour steel, which is about a third of the price of some vertical clad timber, but done well, looks amazing and is eye-catching, and people don't look at Cedar and would be like, oh, that looks 3 times better than that colour steel house if it's done well. So I think those are really key wins in terms of like material selection that can be used on jobs using a polished slab, but then we tip flooring, and then that kind of helps reduce that expense that some clients might be spending on an underfloor system if they're using that. Yeah, and then being involved like early and with that simple design and bouncing ideas with architects about how everything's going to work definitely mitigates the risk of that cost. It's been high performance.
I think the relationship that we've developed, Josh, and the way that we sort of work from concept design almost is like a true testament to that. Like it's quite, particularly if you're probably dealing with a contractor that's not as experienced in high performance building, and you're detailing something that is, that's to the standard, and then you're trying to have to explain it at a later date. Like that's always going to drive costs up, and it's going to make things a lot more difficult.
Particularly for us, those projects are the successful ones, and where the relationship is involved between the designer and the builder and even the client as well. Some understanding what they're trying to achieve. We had another house, we did 6 panels, double story, real simple, modest building on the outside. Just like that, just looks like a big green box. It's 250 squares, I think, with a mezzanine floor. Every time I go and I love it. There's 2 bedrooms and a big boot room, downstairs, laundry, and then a master upstairs and a mezzanine and a living room. And it just feels really big. But in terms of the performance it got and the floor area and just being quite modest with their selections, they just nailed a healthy, comfortable, energy efficient house on their budget. So, it's really nice when it goes that way and it works out well, and it's just getting a really clear understanding of what people want to achieve. They didn't understand how nice it was going to be either.
That's a nice one.
Yeah, people just don't know, I guess, until they've been in one or lived in one.
Yeah, we're finding that with new clients who have visited past clients' houses, and they just really liked it, and they go, "We want one of those." So
it's almost like you need to give them or like organize a overnight stay or something in a house, because you're right. It's not until because on the surface and in the middle of a fine day or something with the windows open, you can't necessarily tell the difference. But it's that overnight experience that then you're like, oh wow, this is quite remarkable. It's the waking up in the morning. In particular down where you are, Rafe and Josh, it's the waking up in the morning in the middle of winter, and it's still 20 degrees in your home, and you look out the window and there's just this blanket of fog everywhere from fireplaces pumping out smoke, to try and keep the houses warm, where you can look out and you can see the framing lines on everybody's houses from the condensation and all that stuff, and you kind of sit there laughing a little bit. Well, that's laughing because you're like, I feel terrible for everybody else, but great for me.
Yeah. That's a really good example of kind of the unseen or unappreciated benefits of this sort of considering this performance, because you won't be able to smell all of that wood smoke.
Yeah.
You won't be able to hear the traffic down the road. You won't be able to, you don't need to hear and experience things you don't want to experience. So like pollen, for example, you don't have to try and rely on openable windows. So if you've got allergies, it's not an issue. Insects, like I love leaving our doors and windows open all summer, but come the evening I close them so I don't get bitten to hell overnight, but we know we're still going to get a well ventilated house sort of thing. So it's just answering those points that you, at the times that you can't do things, I suppose. I was going to say as well, constraints breed creativity. If you've got a blank canvas, you could do flipping anything, and you don't necessarily need to judge all your decisions. So I cut my teeth doing loft extensions and rear extensions and little Georgian terraces in London, and somebody would come and say, I want 2 bedrooms and a bathroom up in this roof space, and it's a 20-degree roof and it's only 2 meters head height. How the hell are you going to fit that in? So kind of working within these constraints from a design perspective, so light, height, and relation to boundary or planning conditions and stuff, you need to kind of really judge every decision you make, and it makes you work harder to achieve the outcome. And that's the same with prescribing measurable performance outcomes rather than she'll be right performance outcomes, because you have to work harder and make sure you're doing the right thing. So how big does that window need to be instead of just a massive wall of glass? What is it framing? Is it framing the view? It pushes better design, I think, because you have to consider these decisions more than you would have done in the first place.
Yeah,
and that's what I enjoy about it.
The framing the view one's an interesting one. I'm sure we've all probably got stories around this, but I've had numerous occasions where, and it's in places that do have spectacular views, where clients are like, we want a wall of glass because we want to see everything. And I'm like, well, you can step outside and see everything. Like, how about we cultivate a view? How about we create this horizontal low window so when you're sitting down at your couch relaxing, you're getting this perfect view shaft out at this thing? And they're like, no, we want to be able to stand there and have everything looking at me all at once. And I'm like, well, do you want it to be 50 degrees in here in the middle of summer? And most of them, they're like, yeah, we don't care. We just want the view. And it's such a hard sell to be like, well, how about we actually do something a little bit more interesting and nuanced and that has a little bit more flavor and texture to it than just like, here it is, here's everything all at once. It's like the super size me of architecture in terms of a meal. Like, no one really wants that.
And it wants the view looking back as well. Like when if you've got a really nice house along a beach or something, people walking on the beach are going to be looking back at you.
The amount of times you see blinds closed in the middle of, at the opportune time of day to actually appreciate the view is pretty horrific.
Yeah.
One thing that grates me a lot is seeing the bed from the street. That's really, but that's a different topic. Yeah. But I think if you present the data at design meetings, like how much it's going to overheat, and then here's the options to mitigate that, external blinds or a triple glazing with a real low G value, things like that, and then compare the capital cost versus the running cost. We often do that just to nudge the design decision into the direction that we want.
Want it. Yeah, nice.
Yeah, but then sometimes on the same breath, presenting too much information to clients often can be overwhelming. And we've noticed over the years is that not to talk about Passive House too much, to say, "Oh, this is what we do.
Yeah,
and this is how we do it, and you're going to be warm."
Yeah, I think. I mean, that was something I think I mentioned to you, Rafe, when we caught up. Like, it's been a slight concern of mine is that when you speak about operating in this space, because a lot of people don't understand it, you instantly get quite pigeonholed, and so a lot of people are like, "Oh, I don't want to talk to them, or I won't talk to this architect or engage with them because they only do Passive House and I don't want a Passive House." But it's not like that. We are just architects at the end of the day. We will try and probably encourage you in the right direction, but it's not like we're part of some cult that will like strike you down if you don't agree. But it's an education thing, right?
Yeah, I think, and that's saying no to some projects as well. Like there are people who want open fireplaces still. And silly stuff. That's fine. Maybe I'm just matured through that, and I used to get quite irritated by those people. But it's like, okay, we don't need those. We just work with people that actually want a decent home to live in, and that is good on the planet.
Yeah, you had a lot of the brush with the green side of things lately, or we want a Passive House. We got approached about quite a large home to have a look at, and and we're not greenies, and we're not into the passive house. And I had a review of their plans, and I was like, we actually, if you're not a greenie, you're incorporating some pretty good practices into your design, which your architect's done in terms of recessed window details and thermally broken slabs and a suspended slab with a double slab with insulation. So I think the web is going a bit wider in terms of other architects that aren't necessarily back themselves on sustainable practice or energy efficiency or high performance. Just know that it's the better way to detail. Now, on this particular job, they said, all our neighbours, it's in a quite large subdivision, big sections, said they've got no problem with that heating their home with the energy systems, but their houses are all too bloody hot in the summer and they hate it. And I was like, it's not like that's where passive house, which they kind of like a taboo word sometimes, can solve your problem quite easily in your design early on. So it's like, I was thinking before, Sam, you should get a psychologist on this podcast.
Talk about the psychology of building.
Psychology of building and architecture and
oh god, it'd end up just being a therapy session.
I say it's like the one thing in New Zealand that it's like, oh, how cheap is your house? How much did you spend? And like, post about how low their square meter rate is, whereas people in that same circle wouldn't be going and telling their friends how cheap and unreliable their Range Rover is.
Yeah.
So
it's a great analogy.
Yeah.
It is interesting that you say, Josh, that you're starting to see it come, or see these better practices come from a wider field, and I think that's sort of evidenced as well this year. The measuring peg in New Zealand for great architecture is our awards program, and this year we've sort of seen for the first time that they've kind of have that sustainability criteria, although it was a requirement but not judged upon or not mandatory this year or something. I don't know. It was very confusing. But like at least it's there and it's a consideration, and it's it's starting to be understood. And I think we are seeing that a lot of like our specialties, I guess, or that what we've considered to be our specialties up to date are now becoming a bit more of the norm. I don't know if that's challenging for us because we're less specialized, but I think overall it's going to result in a better built environment, which is fantastic.
Yes. I think it's really good. I think it's what we've been trying to do, right? So it's kind of working, but slowly. I mean, it's such a slow thing to change. I think the awards thing is quite interesting, that one, because it all depends on who's on the jury and if they actually can read the metrics or not.
Understand them, yeah.
And understand them, yeah. Because we've done that for a number of years, put forward metrics. But, unfortunately, the jury just didn't have, very kind with my words here, just didn't have the experience to actually understand what the numbers were.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's... Yeah. I mean, that's a fair comment, Rafe, and it will be interesting, I think, to see moving forward if that's sort of a role in the jury is taken up by somebody who is experienced in that area.
It'll change over time, but if you repeat that thing every year, people will start to understand what it's about. So yeah, it's a good move.
And even like yourself, Josh, home off, having a green home of the year, that's, I don't know how long that award's been running for now, but that itself, recognizing something in that realm with a higher honor, I think is pretty important, because let's be honest, the way that architecture is best presented throughout New Zealand is through those mechanisms. It's that's an easier way to kind of let it reach a wider audience than us kind of sitting there in one-on-one meetings or trying to convince clients independently. Joe, in your role as chairman now of Passive House Institute, like, have you guys got any plans, thoughts, deliverables, or anything that you're looking at? That's probably a podcast in itself again, but
it is.
Your quick elevator pitch, like, how are you guys looking to try and maybe like bring more people into the fold?
Yeah, I mean, I agreed to take on the role because, it's really interesting being in the design community in New Zealand and kind of seeing all the discussions around, what's happening in the NZ Architecture Forum, the feedback from the sustainability criteria from the awards and all sorts of things, which I've been a bit involved with as well. And we did a survey a few newsletters ago around modelling and just asking, do designers, what do you do to find out how your building's performing rather than just complying? Do you know there's a difference? Do you care there's a difference? That sort of thing. And there was an interesting response to one of them was, I can't believe the NZAA is advocating for modelling. You're going to make architects less relevant. And I find that a really interesting position because, as Josh is saying, our clients are asking for it. They're going to only ask for it more. Surely it's going to make us more relevant. So it's kind of like the sphere of some of the community not really thinking they should or need to be doing that sort of thing and seeing it as just like highfalutin. People put Passive House on this flipping pedestal and they say it's this black and white thing. It's, gold standard all the way up here, too expensive, leads loads of insulation, all these bits and pieces. And none of that's true. Passive House is about the outcomes. That is literally what it is. It is, these are the performance outcomes you need to achieve around energy performance, comfort, and air tightness. How you achieve that is completely up to you. You can do it with whatever materials you want. You can do it with, whatever built form you want, whatever building. There's Passive House swimming pools, there's Passive House schools. It's just about those outcomes. And those outcomes are based on science, but also comfort. So they're based on the World Health Organization requirements of temperature. They're based on the, making sure we're getting the minimum air exchange. So they're kind of what we need to be comfortable. No more, no less. It is the Goldilocks zone sort of thing. And our house up here, it's certified Passive House, and it's got essentially 90 mil walls. It's got a SIP roof, which is a 215 panel, and then it's got a 240 mil suspended timber floor. So a lot of the elements are basically code minimum, if not lower with the R6. We've got R5.2, I think, in the ceiling. It doesn't need to be this R6.6 stuff.
That seems so simple, Joe.
Yeah, and it's just, it doesn't need to be complex. We could have got away with double glazing. We went with triple glazing because it was only $1,000 more from the company in Europe that we got the windows from. So it doesn't need to be difficult.
The deniers of Passive House in Rafe and I's region just need to shift them to Auckland and they'll be Passive House.
Yes, 100%. And that's the point. That's kind of the point, because the other side of the coin is people saying, it's a Scandinavian design thing that's for cold countries only. Passive House is completely site and climate specific. That's the whole reason it works, is because you're using the actual climate data based on the actual location. The Passive House is not an excuse for crap design. You still have to consider good orientation. You still have to consider air, passive cooling through airflow. You still have to consider overhangs, all these sorts of things. But the modelling process and the EQA process just make sure you've got the confidence you've made the right decisions, and you've got an even higher level of QA checking it throughout the built process and then doing the air tightness testing at the end to make sure that you're actually achieving what you set out to achieve in the first place. So it's making us better by pushing us to be better, basically. Sorry, tangents. So my kind of, I took this like a chair roll to kind of try and take Passive House off this over the top pedestal that people have put it on and just take it down and say, hey, we all just want to have healthy buildings. We want to have beautiful buildings, but we want to have healthy buildings. I'm pretty sure we want to have lower energy bills. These are the ways we can do this. Doesn't have to be complicated if you don't make it complicated. It can be very straightforward. It's just these processes which add to what we're doing. They're not changing it. Passive House is based on the principles of passive solar. It's just given us the actual instruction booklet to make sure we're doing it right rather than guessing, which is what we've done so far, sort of thing. So I just want to try and get more people into healthy buildings through that, measurably healthy buildings, really.
I like what you said, Joe, as well earlier on about how constraints can often lead to great design solutions, and sort of the outline of the Passive House principles of the ideas of Passive House, using those constraints to generate your architecture can actually lead to some really amazing outcomes. And I think people aren't really engaging with that yet because they don't understand it, basically, and they kind of see it as a barrier. But it's almost like similarly to what you've done with the Homestar design guide, you've made a very simple, easy to digest and understand for the layperson document. Well, the layperson architect document that people can learn from. It'd be interesting if Passive House was to do something similar. We basically have like a number of design limitations or ideas or concepts that you could employ in your architecture that is going to result in a better performing building without having to necessarily dive into it. Because I think that's a fear for a lot of architects, is that I've got to like completely upskill on something totally new. I've got enough on my plate, blah, 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 blah.
Well, like 70% of the respondents were sole practitioners.
Yeah, right.
I'm running my own company now, and I don't have time to do frigging anything. And these people are probably panicking. How am I going to learn how to do modelling? All this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So we're working with FINS, the NZAA, hopefully ADNZ, and NZGBC are all working together to do a cross-industry roadshow, I suppose you could call it, around what is modelling, how do we do it, and essentially I'm going to do this presentation and then do an energy model in an hour and a half in front of people, and there you go. That's how we do it, and that gives you the instruction booklets for the outcomes you're trying to achieve, to try and take some of the fear out of it. NZ are doing all these ones about embodied carbon at the moment, and I helped with the one in Auckland, and people are like, oh, so you're just measuring areas and then timesing it by the carbon intensity. Here's your carbon model.
Yeah, done.
It doesn't have to be difficult once you kind of start learning it. Yeah, but it's giving people the time, it's giving people the tools, it's giving people, the confidence to give it a go, I suppose. So that's my bag, baby. Just try and get people on the journey.
I find that interesting, the comment that you made about it, the fear that it's making architects less relevant. And, how you're saying you think it's actually making us more relevant. And I totally agree, because I think we're a profession that prides ourselves on learning and growing and developing and understanding. Like not to put ourselves up there too much, but probably, no, actually I'm going to. We are the highest level of design skill in the country. Let's put it that way. There's some great architectural designers and everything out there, but the rigorous kind of process that we've got to go through as architects to get to this point, just kind of leaves us with a better toolbox. And now upskilling ourselves in this kind of further cements our importance to the built environment, where, rather than diminish it, which is a bit of a concern at the moment with certain thoughts on the role of the architect. But, if we're sort of all adopting this, or at least an understanding of it, I think it kind of increases our importance.
Yeah, I think it become more relevant in making sure that design is done well. Yeah. I'm not an architect, I'm a builder. I really dislike building ugly houses. It's not very satisfying at the end of them, nor is it feel like you've really contributed to the built environment. And then, so it's even more important, I guess, the modelling. It means you're not going to be wasting your time as much on that, because you're getting all the data. And so you can spend your energy on what you're really good at, which is the creativity and what I do the job, with the data to kind of back up and reassure you that your design is on track, and you can focus on the creativity and how the space is going to be used and how the people are going to live in it, and what it's going to look like, and then just sitting in the back of your head is, I know all these kids of this family are going to be comfortable. I know that it's going to be healthy. I know the client's not going to be like, this is too hot or this is too cold, or I think it just puts you guys more into focusing on what you're good at.
Yeah, Rafe, you said something to me quite an interesting thing to me when we caught up last. You said think about this, you're only as good as your last project. And, it really resonated with me, actually. So thanks for the comment. But in relating it to this, if you designed a really beautiful piece of architecture, but it's going to cost your client $2,500 a month to heat or cool, is it are you happy with that outcome? Or likewise, if you've designed a really high performance building, but ultimately you're not that happy with the way that it looks aesthetically, are you happy with that outcome? Probably not. So it's now marrying the two and having that balance. And like you said, it's always leaving that indelible mark project after project.
Yeah, difficult question. I think, learning about Passive House, you almost have to reset your aesthetics and all the baggage that you've, as architects, bring from architecture school, which is from my time, it was big thing was deconstruction and postmodern, was coming back, and it was just like everything was thin or just out of control, and shapes everywhere, so many corners and stuff. So as soon as you sort of learn about thermal modeling and how thermodynamics actually works, you realize quite quickly that all those sort of thoughts don't actually work. Physics just doesn't work. So anyway, back to your question about latest project. Yeah, I think it's really important to do the best work you can, and try really, really hard to get the most performance of the project as the project can afford, even if it's sacrificing stuff. And, one thing that I often talk about with clients when we're trying to trim money out of the project, which always happens, is that, these passive house windows, they're twice as much per square meter as a double glazed building code compliant window. Okay, if they're double as much, let's have 50% of the area. So it'll be the same cost. And then that kind of thinking, you have to think like that. It's like, well, instead of having all these windows, let's have just one big window framing that perfect view.
Yep.
And that becomes actually richer than lots of windows. Like I said, it's a big reset. And I think for architects to take on this, they do need to sort of lose some baggage from the education and just rethink things and restart and let the physics sort of shape the building a bit more.
Joe, you talked about, you learning about all of this at university and your time in the UK. Like, how much of a role does does our schools of architecture and design in New Zealand, how much do they need to, play a role in this change and this shifting mindset?
So much.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's just coming back to Ray's point as well. Like, when we were at uni, we studied, the modernists. We went around Vienna and looked at, Luce and Korb and all sorts of bits and pieces. And, that's kind of the stuff that's lauded. So I think historically there's been quite a disconnect between form and function and performance. Almost seem like kind of like different sides of it. So like, the Ville Savoir is this incredible piece of architecture, but there's famously a letter from the client to Korb saying that they just can't live in it. They can't live in it because it's boiling in summer, freezing in winter, and there's water pissing down the walls all the time. And yet we kind of celebrate that as an item. But then architects are kind of essentially healthcare providers because we have the biggest impact on the health of people in the world. We design all of the spaces people inhabit. It would be nice if architects designed all the spaces. Some of them aren't designed architects. That's probably even worse because they're even less kind of considered spaces. And so we have the biggest impact on people's health because, we design the fabric of our cities and our homes and all sorts of things. So we should absolutely be taking that as one of our responsibilities. Our code of ethics literally says in it, we should do no harm to others, basically. And if we are designing buildings without considering whether they're going to be harming these people, surely we're failing in that responsibility sort of thing. So the uni in the UK, we did Passive House. We had a fantastic, I had a 3D workshop where I did I used a lathe to do my classical columns for one of my projects, and then I did Ramderf in another project, and it was just awesome. But on the flip side, we had Archilab, which was energy modeling, Passive House, looking at thermodynamics, all sorts of bits and pieces. And, we used to, I can think back to several projects we did where you're still trying to get that really nice thin roof line, but you've still got the big steel, which needs a thermal break and the vapor barrier and all sorts of things. So we just got on with it. And we still designed pretty bloody nice buildings. And like I've done a few lectures for unis here, and I've got a couple more coming up. And for this one that's coming up in August, I kind of said, so which course is this? And it was the building sciences course. I said, cool. So how do you guys tie into the design course? We don't really. There's an optional part that some students could do if they like. But then architects come out of uni basically like engineers, I'd never done bracing design before I came here. I probably still haven't, to be honest, because I prefer to leave the structure to the engineers. But that's fine. Architects will come out of architecture school as designers and kind of engineers, but they'll leave the performance and the healthcare and the energy to other people. And that kind of just doesn't connect with me. Yeah, maybe it's my OCD, but I like to have control of all of my, or as much control within reason, all the little parts of the project,
That's amazing to hear, Joe. I really liked your education background.
It was cool. It was,
fantastic.
Kingston University, West London. Smash on.
I think we had a services paper in Victoria, and we learnt about heating and cooling systems, just sort of they're like life support systems for architecture, but we never learnt about fabric or the envelope of buildings and how energy goes through them and stuff. And I was just like, in hindsight, I was just like, geez, who's running this show?
There's that missing piece.
Yeah, the whole architecture education side of things is fascinating. It's the 101 things I didn't learn at architecture school when you get into practice. We get taught to design, but often very little else.
There's the main architecture study done in Wellington and Auckland. Yeah, younger people. But I wondered what, like the graduate side of things, do you guys see coming through? Thinking more about it? Or?
So we've got a graduate. She's been working with us. She worked with us through her time at university, and she's just come on full time now. And because she's been working with us for the last 4 years, she's been exposed to all of this. And it's interesting talking to her about her peers and their knowledge in this sector, and they have none. They don't understand it at all. It's not taught. They've got no. They don't even really have an understanding of the building code to begin with, let alone this as a level above it. So, there's a long way to go in the education sector.
It's not Elron's starting at Victoria, isn't he?
Mm-hmm.
So things might be changing.
Oh, interesting. Oh, that'll be cool.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I have heard before that kind of argument of shouldn't design at university be unconstrained so people could spread their wings and not have to, you look at kind of some of the stuff coming out of the AA in London, which is floating cities in the sky and all these crazy things, push the imagination without having to worry about a client in a brief, which is absolutely sensational. And we need that side of design, but also then they come out of the university on the other side and can't design a toilet, which we also need to do, sort of thing.
The ice bath of real practice.
And there needs to be a balance in there, kind of allowing our imaginations and design flair to soar, but also try and at least ground it in the realities of practice and commercial realities of timesheets and billables and all that kind of horrific stuff, which we don't actually want to really think about, but we kind of have to if we're going to run successful practices. I think most practices in New Zealand are like between 1 and 5 people, aren't they? Yeah. So as designers, we have to do flipping everything.
Awesome, guys. Well, we've just ticked over an hour, so we'll probably look to wrap it up. But I'd love to get some sort of just final closing thoughts from all of you. Just open floor, whatever you kind of want to impart on listeners. At the end.
One thing I referred to high performance building, and I was kind of thinking about it probably a bit too much, is that maybe we should shift the reference plane there or the bar and just consider that normal building, and then talk about low performance building.
Yeah, it's so true.
Yeah.
I'll start doing that. Would you like us to design you a low performance building?
Yeah,
no, thank you.
That's pretty off-putting.
I know.
Oh yeah, that sounds like a low performance building. What you want?
You
tarnish it with that. You tarnish it with that, and from the outset, like it's just going to leave a sour taste in people's mouths. I like that idea because when you use the high performance term, it kind of makes it sound like you're elevating it as something that's like almost unachievable.
Yeah. If you go into a sales place, selling fridges, and people say, well, so the salesperson goes, oh, would you like a low performance fridge? And you go, oh, I don't know.
Yeah, it may or may not curdle your milk.
Exactly.
Yeah,
nice.
That's my fight. That's my word.
I like that, Rafe. That's great.
I don't know. I just encourage people to test themselves, and if they're an architect or a designer, and what they can achieve. And you guys have definitely given away some pretty, awesome insights to how you learned or what you learned over time and what you've developed. And there's builders podcasts out there as well, giving away a lot of good information. So it's not like the information's not out there. And even clients can do the research as well. But yeah, passive house is not ugly architecture, and it can be done really well. And I think just finding the right people for your projects and just dare to be a bit different Don't be boring.
Yeah, like one thing that I think as well on that, Josh, is, find the right people for your project. It's build the right team at the start as well. Have the designer, have the contractor, have whoever else you want to be involved, structural engineer, even geotechs. Let's be honest, have everybody there at the beginning and have them aiming for that same goal of normal performance building.
Yes.
Regular building, as we're calling it now, because ultimately, if everybody's on that same stream flow, you're going to end up with a good result. And that concern about cost and all of that sort of stuff ends up going away because it just becomes the norm for everybody throughout the course of the project. So, I mean, it's something that I think you and I have really put to the test and proven that it works, and kind of hope to continue to see that happen throughout the industry.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of low performance building, Rafe. We've been because the problem is high performance. There's no measurement. It covers a multitude of sins. Is low performance 1 and 2 to 99 is high performance, and then 100 is passive house sort of thing. So we've got a board meeting down in Wellington on next week. So I'm gonna propose that for low performance building. Yeah, I'll credit you, I promise. I suppose my thing is kind of coming back to relevance. Like, if we're designing a building now, and as Josh said as well, are we gonna? And it take bloody long time to build a building in New Zealand. Let's be honest. So we're starting the design now. It might be finished in a year or even 2 years if it's a really complicated thing. By the time that building's finished, it's going to be no longer relevant because things are going to move. They're going to keep moving. Performance standards are going to shift. The building code's going to continue changing. So why not just aim for the top? Why not aim for the best level of performance? And yes, there are absolutely conversations of kind of where that best level is, because low energy building standard from Passive House is 30 kilowatt hours. Passive House is 15 kilowatt hours. Most new builds are around 120 kilowatt hours of energy demand for heating. So even 30 kilowatt hours is a significant step up from where we are. And there's all these kind of conversations around, is this a relevant construction or design typology for our climate? It's relevant for every climate. There are passive house dwellings in Antarctica. There are passive house dwellings in Dubai. It is completely climate specific. It just allows you to design and have the confidence you're designing correctly for that climate. So why don't we want to be better? Why don't we want to, push ourselves, constrain ourselves, and
Just on that, it's quite interesting looking back at our grandparents' era where they built the best buildings that they could with what they had.
Yep.
And now we don't seem to do that. We're just like tiptoeing around.
Yeah, when I came to New Zealand, one of the first things I did, I went to a lecture at ProClimber, and Thomas presented the timber tents that New Zealanders build. And it is kind of a timber tent. We haven't really got much further past from a we built sensationally beautiful buildings, but from a performance perspective, it is still a frame with something on the outside and the inside and a bit of fluff in the middle. And that, there is a lot of conversation. People think that passive house or high performance means loads of membranes and tapes and plastics and glues and all sorts of things. But there are straw bale passive houses. Look at Jessica's place down in Wanaka. I was speaking to somebody that came back from Germany last week, and they were talking to a prefab builder who's doing prefabricated passive house designs, which are completely timber. There isn't a single membrane. There isn't a single tape. It's 140 timber wall with sheepshawl insulation in, a timber air barrier, wood fibre insulation in the services cavity, wood fibre insulation on the outside, which is also the weather tightness line because it's free drains, ventilated cavity, then timber cladding, timber windows, and all of the air tightness is friction fit because they're prefabbing everything. They can get it millimetre perfect, so they don't even have to rely on tapes and membranes and stuff. So it doesn't, we don't have to go down this oil-based, overly complex, lots of layers. We can still do it simply, but we just need to, in the New Zealand market, we need to kind of drive to get these products in so we can actually start using them, to be honest, and get the market for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you all, and thank you for giving up your time to chat performance in architecture and aesthetics, and hope to see us all continue to push things in the right direction in New Zealand.
Thanks, Sam.
Sam.
Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.